My daughter's voice was steady, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror before driving here. She stood at the petitioner's table with her hands folded in that prayer position people use when they want to look humble while demanding everything. The fluorescent lights of the Montgomery County Probate Court made her highlighted hair glow like a halo she absolutely did not deserve. She's not herself since Dad died, Your Honor. She forgets things. She can't manage anymore. She's 62. At a certain age, we have to accept that our parents need help, whether they want to admit it or not. I sat at the respondent's table with Maggie Harrison, my attorney, who at 58 wore her gray hair natural and her skepticism like armor. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee, and the particular kind of desperation that comes from families eating each other alive under the guise of love. Behind Jessica, my son-in-law Robert shifted in his seat, his pharmaceutical sales smile plastered on like he was pitching blood pressure medication to a resistant doctor. In the gallery, a handful of faces I recognized from holiday dinners I'd hosted for 30 years watched like this was dinner theater they'd paid admission for. Judge Patricia Moore, 64 with reading glasses hanging from a chain, and an expression that suggested she'd heard every variation of this story, glanced down at the petition before her. Thursday morning, late September, and somewhere outside the courthouse windows, people my age were drinking coffee in their own homes, with their own money in their own bank accounts. I used to be one of them. Ms. Morgan, you're petitioning for temporary conservatorship of your mother, Catherine Sullivan, based on age-related cognitive decline and financial mismanagement. Is that correct? Jessica's voice went soft, the way it always did when she wanted something. Yes, Your Honor. I love my mother, but love means knowing when to step in. The word landed in my chest like a stone. Love. She said it like a weapon, like something she could hold over my head until I stopped struggling. I knew what Jessica was really saying, what she'd been saying in 1,000 small ways for 2 years. Not, Mom needs help, but Mom is old. Mom is useless. Mom can't possibly understand her own life anymore because she's 62, and therefore incompetent by default. I'd heard the variations since Richard died. Mom, you shouldn't drive at night anymore. Mom, this technology is too complicated for you. Mom, let me handle it, you'll just get confused. Judge Moore's pen tapped once against her notepad. Mr. Cooper, you mentioned financial mismanagement in your filing. Specifics, please. Thomas Cooper stood, 52 years old, and every inch of him screaming sleazy elder law attorney who specialized in helping families protect aging parents straight into poverty. He opened a manila folder with the kind of theatrical precision that made me think of magicians pulling rabbits from hats. Approximately $187,000 has left Mrs. Sullivan's accounts in the past 18 months, Your Honor. No documentation, no receipts, no explanation. When my client attempted to discuss this with her mother, Mrs. Sullivan became defensive and couldn't account for the spending. She doesn't even remember where the money went. A small sound moved through the gallery. Not quite a gasp, more like a collective intake of breath from people who were already halfway convinced that a 62-year-old widow couldn't possibly manage her own checkbook. To them, that number probably sounded like confirmation. Poor confused Catherine, throwing money away because her aging brain couldn't keep track anymore. Judge Moore looked at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were sharp behind those reading glasses, and I recognized something in them. She'd seen this script before. Mrs. Sullivan, do you understand what your daughter is requesting? I lifted my chin slightly, kept my voice clear and steady, every word a small act of defiance against the narrative Jessica had been building for 2 years. Yes, Your Honor. My daughter wants legal authority to control my finances, my property, and my medical decisions. She wants to declare me incompetent. Jessica flinched at the word. Too honest, too raw. It stripped away the soft language she preferred, words like protection and support and what's best for Mom. And do you believe you need a conservator? No, Your Honor. I believe my daughter needs money and found the easiest target. The room went still in a way I could feel against my skin. Robert's smile finally cracked. Cooper's hand froze halfway to his briefcase, and Jessica's carefully composed expression slipped just enough to show what was underneath. Not concern, not love, but rage at being called out in public. Judge Moore's pen tapped twice, a rhythm that sounded like punctuation. She flipped through the account records before her, page after page of transactions that probably looked damning if you didn't know the context. If you didn't know that every single transfer had been made by Jessica, not me. That I hadn't even seen these accounts in months because my own daughter had locked me out of my own financial life. These transfers were made electronically, Mr. Cooper. What notifications were set up on the accounts? Cooper cleared his throat, and I watched him reach for the script Jessica had given him. Digital alerts, Your Honor. Standard practice for online banking. Judge Moore leaned forward slightly, and her voice took on an edge that made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. Whose email receives those alerts, Ms. Morgan? Jessica answered too quickly, the words tumbling out before she could think them through. Mine. I set it up to monitor her accounts, for her safety. The judge didn't look at me. She looked at the file in front of her, then back at Jessica, and her voice went very plain. Who set up the digital alerts in the first place? The room shifted. I felt it in my ribs, in the way the air pressure seemed to change. Cooper's hand went still on his legal pad. Jessica blinked hard, her face doing something between buffering and recalculating. And I stayed exactly where I was, calm and quiet, because that question wasn't small, it wasn't random. It was the kind you ask when you already see the outline of the truth, and you just need someone to walk into it on the record. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Cooper like he could save her. Cooper didn't move. He stared at the judge like he was trying to read her mind, trying to figure out how much she already knew. Judge Moore waited. No rush, no theatrics. Just silence, the kind that makes liars start talking too much. Jessica finally forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I helped her set them up, Your Honor. After Dad died, she was overwhelmed. I was just trying to make sure she didn't miss anything important. I knew exactly when Jessica set up those alerts. 3 months after Richard's funeral, on a Tuesday afternoon in my dining room, while I was still wearing black to the grocery store, when I was vulnerable, when I was in my daughter's mind, easy prey. 2 years earlier, Richard died on a Thursday morning in our bedroom. I found him when I brought him coffee at 7:15, the mug still warm in my hand when I realized he was gone. Heart attack at 65, no warning, no time to prepare, just there one moment and gone the next. The paramedics were kind, but their kindness couldn't change the outcome. At the hospital, a doctor who looked too young to be making life and death pronouncements told me what I already knew. I signed papers. I made phone calls. I moved through those first hours like I was underwater. The funeral was packed. Richard had owned Sullivan Hardware on Main Street for 35 years, and half the town had a story about him helping them find the right screw or explaining how to fix a leaky faucet. I stood at the front of the church in a black dress I'd bought the day before because I didn't own one, listening to people talk about my husband in past tense, while my brain refused to accept the grammar. Jessica arrived that first night with printed lists and a tone that suggested I should be grateful. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Richard and I had eaten breakfast that final morning, and spread out her organizational system like a general planning a campaign. Mom, I'll handle everything. You just rest. I was too tired to argue, too numb to do anything but nod. That was my first mistake. Accepting help when I was vulnerable, letting my daughter position herself as the only thing standing between me and complete collapse. The house felt enormous without Richard. We'd bought it 35 years ago when Jessica was a baby, a small ranch in the suburbs where we could raise our family and build a life. Every room held memories. The kitchen where Richard taught Jessica to make pancakes. The garage where he stored his tools with the kind of precision he'd applied to everything in his life. The bedroom where he died, which I couldn't sleep in anymore. I made coffee for 2 every morning out of habit, then remembered halfway through pouring the second cup. I forgot to eat unless someone reminded me. I wore the same sweater for 3 days because taking it off felt like too much work. This was grief. Normal, devastating, human grief. Not dementia, not decline. Just a woman learning to live in a house that was too quiet. Jessica showed up every day with something new to handle. Week 1, it was bill pay. Mom, let me set this up for you. You shouldn't have to think about utilities right now. Week 2. Insurance paperwork. Mom, this stuff is so complicated. Let me talk to them. Week 3. Medical bills from the hospital. Mom, you don't need to understand all this. I'll take care of it. Each time, she removed another piece of my agency. Each time, she made it sound like she was doing me a favor. And each time, I was too exhausted to fight back. My best friend Diane came by the second week with a casserole and concern. She sat across from me at the kitchen table while Jessica hovered in the doorway, and her voice was gentle when she said it. Jess is hovering a lot. I heard myself defend my daughter, heard the automatic response of a mother who'd spent 35 years making excuses. She's just helping. Diane's eyes said what her mouth wouldn't. Helping or taking over? I didn't want to admit I'd been wondering the same thing. She means well. 3 months after the funeral, Jessica showed up with her laptop and a stack of folders that looked official enough to be intimidating. She set up her command center at my dining room table, the way she'd been doing for weeks, and announced we needed to get my affairs organized. For your protection, Mom. She printed out a document titled Power of Attorney, Healthcare and Financial, and slid it across the table like it was nothing. Like signing away control of my entire life was just another item on a checklist, just in case something happens. Dad didn't have this ready, and look how hard that made everything. The words hit exactly where she'd aimed them. Richard's death had been chaos precisely because we hadn't prepared. No advance directives, no clear instructions. Just me fumbling through decisions while in shock. Jessica was right about that much. But being right about one thing didn't make her right about everything. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the pen. I don't know, Jess. This seems like a lot. She sighed, and it was the same patient sigh adults use with children who are being deliberately difficult. Mom, this is standard. Everyone your age needs this. What if you fall? What if you get sick? What if you forget to pay bills? Everyone your age. The phrase was a knife wrapped in velvet, sharp under the soft packaging. She was 35. I was 62. In her mind, that gap made me ancient, incompetent, in need of supervision. Robert leaned forward from where he'd been standing near the doorway, adding his voice to the pressure. Mom, Jess is just trying to protect you. You trust her, don't you? The question was designed to corner me. If I said no, I was paranoid, ungrateful, letting grief make me suspicious of my own daughter. If I said yes, I had to prove it by signing. Of course I trust her. Jessica pushed the papers closer, her voice going soft with false compassion. Then just sign. It's only for emergencies. I signed because I was tired, because grief had worn me down to nothing, because I wanted to believe my daughter had my best interests at heart. I signed, and I kept the pen, and I slid the packet back across the table. Jessica smiled like she'd won something. What I didn't know, what she'd carefully avoided explaining, was that the power of attorney gave her immediate access, not just in emergencies, not just if I became incapacitated. Right now, today, to every account, every asset, every financial decision. She could act on all of it, and she already had. That same afternoon, she opened her laptop and announced we needed to set up online banking so I could check my accounts. I looked at her like she'd lost her mind. I've had online banking for years. Work required it. Her laugh was dismissive, designed to make me feel small. Mom, that was years ago. Technology changes. You're not working anymore. Let me set up something simple for you. There it was again, the casual erasure of my expertise. I'd been CFO of a regional logistics company for 23 years, the last woman standing in a field of men who'd spent decades telling me I didn't understand numbers. I understood banking better than Jessica ever would. But she was 35 and tech-savvy, and I was 62, and therefore obsolete. I tried anyway. I can do it. I was a CFO. I understand banking. Her tone went sharp with condescension. Mom, being a CFO 20 years ago is different from managing personal finances now. You're retired. You deserve to not worry about this stuff. She made retirement sound like a diagnosis. Like the day I'd left my corner office, I'd also left behind my ability to think, to manage, to function as an adult. She typed fast on her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard with purpose, and I watched her create something I didn't have access to. I'll add my email for notifications. That way, if anything weird happens, I'll catch it. I felt the warning bells, but I was too tired to listen to them. I want to receive them too. Mom, you'll just get confused with all those emails. Trust me. I'll let you know if anything important comes up. I should have fought harder. Should have insisted. Should have recognized that my daughter was systematically removing my access to my own life. But I didn't. I was too tired, too sad, too ready to believe that accepting help was the same thing as being helped. Fine. That single word was my second mistake, and it would cost me everything. What I didn't know, what Jessica had made sure I'd never know, was that 1 year before his death, Richard had opened a safety deposit box. He'd taken our granddaughter Emma, then just shy of 15, with him to the bank. He'd made her promise to keep it secret, told her it was just between them, sworn her to silence unless something happened to him and I needed help. Real help, he'd said, not the kind her mother offered. Inside that box, he'd put a letter addressed to me and documentation of Jessica's financial problems that I didn't know existed. Emma asked him why he didn't just tell me. Richard's answer was simple and devastating. Because I wouldn't believe him without proof. And because he hoped he was wrong. But if he wasn't, if things went the way he feared, I would need what was in that box. Richard knew our daughter in ways I'd refused to see. Jessica's resentment hadn't started with Richard's death. It had been building for decades, brick by brick, constructed from every moment I'd chosen my career over being the mother she thought I should be. When she was 8, I missed her school play because I was closing a quarter. When she was 12, I worked weekends while she went to sleepovers. When she was 15, I turned down a promotion that would have meant more travel, but she never knew about the sacrifice. She only saw the times I wasn't there. All her friends had mothers who volunteered in classrooms and baked cookies for fundraisers and showed up for every field trip. Mine was the one who rushed in late to parent-teacher conferences still wearing her work clothes, checking her watch, apologizing for the interruption. Jessica learned early that my time was valuable, just not valuable enough to spend on her. I worked so she could have everything. Piano lessons I paid for with overtime, summer camps funded by weekends at the office, college tuition I'd saved for since she was born. But she never saw those trade-offs. She only saw absence, and she built her entire adult life in reaction to mine. She married Robert at 23, young enough to prove she was nothing like me. Had Emma at 19, determined to be the stay-at-home mother I'd never been. Got her real estate license because it seemed like easy money, flexible hours, time for family. She positioned herself as everything I wasn't, present, available, devoted to home and hearth. Her social media told the story she wanted people to believe. Hashtags about being a boss babe and living her best life. Photos of her in designer clothes standing in front of luxury properties she'd never sell. The reality was messier. She barely broke even most months, living on Robert's pharmaceutical sales income and credit cards she maxed out, trying to maintain an image of success. In 2019, she convinced Robert to invest $80,000 in what she called a sure thing property flip. The house had foundation issues the inspector missed. They lost everything and covered it with credit cards Robert didn't know about. Then came the leased BMW because realtors needed to look successful, and the designer wardrobe bought on credit, and Emma's private school tuition at $18,000 a year because public school wasn't good enough. By the time Richard died, Jessica was $120,000 in debt, and Robert had no idea. When the funeral was over and the life insurance money landed in my account, Jessica saw a solution to all her problems. She just had to convince everyone, including me, that I was too old to manage it myself. 6 months after Richard's death, Jessica had full control of everything. She'd changed every password, added herself to every account, registered her power of attorney with every financial institution. The spending started small and disguised itself as legitimate. Senior Life Management Services, at $1,200 a month, was actually Jessica paying her own credit card bills. Home Maintenance and Safety, at $2,500, was her BMW payment. Medical expense reimbursement, at $1,800, was Emma's tuition. She was careful with the descriptions, made them sound reasonable, bet on the fact that I wouldn't see the statements because she'd made sure all the notifications went to her email. When I tried to access my accounts online, the passwords didn't work. I'd call Jessica, frustrated, and she'd log in for me, show me the balance without showing the transaction history. See, everything's fine. Why do you need to check anyway? Don't you trust me? That question again, weaponized, designed to make me feel paranoid for wanting access to my own money. She started building her evidence of my incompetence with the systematic precision of someone who'd planned this from the beginning. She recorded me on her phone when I couldn't find my car keys, when I forgot what I'd gone to the store to buy, when I asked her a question she claimed I'd already asked. Normal moments of everyday forgetfulness became proof of cognitive decline in Jessica's carefully edited compilation. She created situations designed to make me look confused, scheduled doctor's appointments without telling me, then expressed concern when I missed them, told people I'd agreed to things I'd never agreed to, then suggested I'd forgotten the conversation, isolated me from my support system by answering my phone when friends called, telling them I was napping, that I napped a lot these days, that I was having trouble keeping track of things. My book club called to ask why I'd missed 3 meetings in a row. I hadn't known there were meetings. Jessica had been intercepting the emails. Diane stopped by less often because Jessica told her I got tired easily, needed my rest, couldn't handle too much stimulation. My church volunteer coordinator removed me from the schedule after Jessica explained I was overwhelmed with my husband's death and needed time to adjust. Even my friends started believing Jessica's narrative. Diane pulled me aside one Sunday after church, her face soft with concern. "Kat, Jess says you've been forgetting things." I heard myself defending my own competence like it was something that needed defending. "I'm fine. I'm just adjusting." Diane's hand on my arm was gentle, pitying. "Honey, it's okay to slow down. You're not 30 anymore." Nobody is 30 anymore once they hit 30. But apparently after 60, not being 30 was proof of decline. 8 months after Richard died, I found a credit card statement that Jessica had missed. One piece of mail in a sea of redirected correspondence. And it had a charge I didn't recognize. Sullivan Real Estate, LLC, for $4,500. I called Jessica from my kitchen. The statement spread out on the counter in front of me. "What's this charge?" Her answer was smooth, practiced, delivered without hesitation. "Oh, that's the property tax service I set up. So you don't miss payments." I gripped the counter hard enough to hurt my hand. "I've never missed a property tax payment in 40 years. Mom, you're not keeping track like you used to. That's what I'm here for." The alarm in my head got louder, impossible to ignore. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for months, and I'd been too grief-stricken to see it clearly. But I was seeing it now. 2 days later, the doorbell rang while I was reading in the living room. A man in a suit stood on my porch holding a clipboard and a camera, looking official in that way contractors and inspectors do. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm here for the appraisal." My stomach went cold. What appraisal? His confusion matched mine. "Your daughter scheduled it. She said you wanted to sell." The world tilted sideways. "I am not selling this house." He shifted uncomfortably, already backing away from whatever family drama he'd stumbled into. "I'm sorry, ma'am. She said you'd be confused about it, that you'd agreed but might not remember." There it was, the narrative Jessica had been building, deployed in real time to override my actual wishes. She'd told the stranger I was confused, and he'd believed her because she was younger, because I was 62, because confused elderly woman was easier to accept than daughter lying about her mother's intentions. I drove to Jessica's house, shaking with rage I hadn't let myself feel in months. She opened the door with fake concern painted across her face like stage makeup. "Mom, you drove here alone? Is that safe?" I pushed past her into the entryway, into the house I'd helped her buy, furnished with things I'd given her for holidays and birthdays. Why was there an appraiser at my house? She closed the door slowly, composing her features into patient understanding. "Mom, we talked about this. The house is too big for you. Those stairs are dangerous. You could fall." "I never agreed to sell." Her voice stayed soft, reasonable, the tone you use with children and confused elderly parents. "Mom, you did. Last week at dinner. Don't you remember?" The gaslighting was so smooth I almost questioned myself, almost wondered if I really had agreed, if my memory really was failing, if I was actually declining into the incompetence Jessica kept insisting I had. Almost. I drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel, pulled into my garage, and sat in the car while the overhead light faded to black. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that maybe I was getting old, maybe I was forgetting things, maybe I did need help. It would be easier than fighting, easier than admitting my own daughter was systematically stealing from me while using my age as camouflage. But then I went inside and pulled out my old work notebooks from the home office I'd maintained for 40 years. Ledgers and spreadsheets and meticulous documentation of everything I'd ever managed. I'd kept books for 4 decades, tracked every penny through recessions and acquisitions and corporate restructuring. I hadn't suddenly become incompetent the day I turned 62. I found old bank statements from before Jessica's takeover and compared them to the credit card statement that had slipped through her net. The numbers didn't match. Thousands of dollars in discrepancies, patterns of spending I'd never authorized, transfers I'd never made. My hands were steady when I closed the notebook. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't declining. I was being robbed by my own daughter, who was using my grief and my widowhood and my age as tools to convince everyone, including me, that I was too old to manage my own life. 10 months after Richard's death, I tried to buy groceries with my credit card and watched it get declined at the register. The cashier ran it twice while the people in line behind me shifted with impatience. I paid with cash, mortified, and drove home in silence. I called the credit card company from my kitchen, my voice clipped and professional in the way it got when I was furious. "This account was closed 6 months ago, Mrs. Sullivan." I didn't close it. It shows here that authorized user Jessica Morgan closed it for security purposes. I made her check every card. All closed. All by Jessica. All months ago while I'd been using cash. Oblivious. The bank was worse. I couldn't access my checking account online because the passwords had been changed and the security questions I'd set up were wrong now. The representative was patient with me in that careful way people use with elderly customers they assume are confused. "Ma'am, these were recently updated by your power of attorney. Give me my balance." The number hit me like a physical blow. 47,000 down to 8,000 in less than a year. And I hadn't seen a single transaction because Jessica had made sure every notification, every statement, every alert went to her email, not mine. I wasn't declining, I wasn't confused. I was being systematically robbed by my own daughter, who had weaponized my age and my grief to make it look like I was too incompetent to notice. I Googled Elder Financial Abuse Attorney Pennsylvania with hands that were finally steady, finally certain. The search brought up Maggie Harrison's website, Elder Law and Protection. Her bio said she'd won her own conservatorship case against her son 5 years ago and now helped others fight the same battle. I called before I could second-guess myself. Her office was practical, files stacked on every surface, a box of tissues on the desk because she knew her clients cried. She was 58 with gray hair she didn't bother to dye, and eyes that had seen this story before. "Tell me what happened." The words came out in a flood. Everything I'd been holding in for months. All the small humiliations and large thefts and constant drumbeat of, "Mom, you're too old, Mom, you're confused, Mom, let me handle it." I cried, which I hated, but Maggie just pushed the tissue box closer and let me talk. When I finally stopped, she asked the only question that mattered. "How old are you?" 62. Maggie leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since Richard died, someone looked at me and saw competence instead of decline. "I'm 58. Am I too old to practice law?" I laughed through tears. "No. Then you're not too old to manage your own life. Now let's prove it." I pulled documentation from my purse. Bank statements, the credit card bill Jessica had missed, a calendar showing appointments I'd supposedly forgotten that I'd never been told about, a list of every time Jessica had isolated me from friends and support. 40 years as a CFO had trained me to document everything. And muscle memory had kicked in even when I didn't consciously realize I was building a case. Maggie looked through it with something like satisfaction. Your daughter picked the wrong target. We built the strategy over 3 hours. Freeze credit at all 3 bureaus. File elder abuse report with Adult Protective Services. Request forensic audit of all accounts. Get medical evaluation to prove competence. Prepare for Jessica's inevitable response. She's going to file for conservatorship, Maggie said, matter of fact. She has to now. You're fighting back, which means you're dangerous. She'll use your age as her primary weapon. She'll say grief made you paranoid. She'll say you can't accept your declining. Can you handle your own daughter calling you incompetent in open court? I thought about 40 years of boardrooms filled with men who thought I was too young, too female, too soft, too emotional, too ambitious, too aggressive, too old. I'd survived all of it. I could survive my daughter. Yes. My phone buzzed with a text as I was leaving Maggie's office. Emma, my granddaughter, who Jessica monitored like a prison warden. Grandma, can we meet? Alone? I have something for you. From Grandpa. I stared at the message for a long time before I answered. Richard had known. Somehow he'd known this was coming, and he'd left me a way to fight back. I just had to be brave enough to use it. The conservatorship petition arrived the next week, taped to my front door like an eviction notice. Jessica Lynn Morgan petitioning for temporary conservatorship of Catherine Marie Sullivan, based on age-related cognitive decline, financial mismanagement, and inability to care for herself. The specifics made my grief look like dementia. Sleeps irregularly, isolates from family, shows signs of paranoia, unable to maintain housing, failed to monitor estate accounts, demonstrates poor judgment. She'd taken every normal response to loss and reframed it as evidence of incompetence. She'd taken my age and made it a weapon. She'd taken my widowhood and turned it into proof I couldn't function without supervision. I called Maggie, who'd been expecting this. Now we fight. Court date, 14 days. Medical evaluation scheduled for tomorrow. Credit frozen. Elder abuse report filed. Forensic accountant hired. Everything moving fast now because Jessica had forced the timeline by filing an emergency petition. I met Emma that night at a coffee shop across town, somewhere Jessica wouldn't think to look. My granddaughter was almost 17 and looked so much like me at that age it hurt. She slid a small key across the table between our lattes. Grandpa made me promise to give you this if you ever needed it. He said you'd know when. The key was for a safety deposit box at a bank I'd never used. Richard's handwriting on the paperwork, his signature, his planning. He'd seen Jessica's patterns long before I had. He'd known our daughter was capable of this, and he'd made sure I'd have what I needed to fight back. I drove to the bank the next morning and opened the box with hands that didn't shake anymore. Inside, a letter addressed to me in Richard's familiar script, and a folder of documents I didn't know existed. Bank statements showing Jessica's debts, credit card records, evidence of the real estate disaster she'd hidden from everyone. Proof that my daughter was desperate enough to steal from her own mother to cover her mistakes. The letter was worse, better, both. Kat, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Jessica's made her move. I hoped I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong. But I know our daughter, and I know desperation when I see it. She's been in financial trouble for years. I have proof. Use it. Don't let her take advantage of your grief. Don't let her use your age against you. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Fight back. I love you. Richard. I sat in the bank vault and cried for the husband who'd protected me even after death. For the daughter I'd raised who'd become someone I didn't recognize. For the version of myself who'd believed family meant safety. Then I took the documents to Maggie and we prepared for war. The medical evaluation took 4 hours. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, psychiatric evaluation, neurological exam. The doctor was thorough and kind and entirely unconvinced I had anything wrong with me besides normal grief and justified anger. Mrs. Sullivan, your cognitive function is completely normal for your age. Better than normal, actually. You scored in the 95th percentile for memory and executive function. There is no medical basis for claims of incompetence or decline. I asked her to put it in writing, notarized, ready for court. 2 weeks after Jessica filed, I walked into that courtroom with Maggie beside me and Richard's letter in my purse. Jessica stood at her table in her expensive dress, playing the concerned daughter, ready to testify that her elderly mother needed saving from herself. She had no idea what was coming. Judge Moore asked whose email received the account alerts, and I watched my daughter's carefully constructed story start to crumble. This was just the beginning. The evidence would speak for itself, the way numbers always did, and when it was done, everyone would know the truth. I wasn't declining. I was fighting back. And at 62, I was just getting started. Jessica's smile started to slip. Not dramatically, not in a way that would look obvious to someone who didn't know her, but I'd raised this woman, nursed her through colic and homework and heartbreak, and I could read the micro-expressions crossing her face like subtitles. The courtroom question hung in the air. Who set up the digital alerts? And my daughter was calculating how to answer in a way that wouldn't sound like a confession. Judge Moore waited with the patience of someone who'd spent 25 years watching families implode in her courtroom. The gallery shifted, uneasy, sensing the change in atmospheric pressure. Maggie sat beside me utterly still, a predator watching prey stumble into a trap it didn't know existed. Jessica's voice came out higher than she probably intended. "Your Honor, I was just trying to help. After Dad died, Mom was overwhelmed. She couldn't keep track of things. I set up the alert so nothing would fall through the cracks." The judge's expression didn't change, but something in her posture sharpened. "That's not what I asked, Ms. Morgan. I asked who initiated the setup, you or your mother. I did, but she wanted me to. She asked me to handle it. Do you have documentation of that request?" Cooper started to stand, recognized there was nowhere good this could go, and sat back down. Jessica's hands unfolded from their prayer position and gripped the edge of the table. It was verbal, during a difficult time. I was just trying to protect her. Judge Moore made a notation on her legal pad, and the sound of pen on paper seemed louder than it should have been. "We'll return to that. Mrs. Sullivan, before you present documentation, I want to understand the timeline. When did your husband pass away?" I kept my voice steady, professional, the same tone I'd used in 40 years of board meetings. 2 years ago this past April, Your Honor. Heart attack. He was 65. And when did your daughter begin assisting with your financial accounts? She started showing up daily within a week of the funeral. The formal takeover happened about 3 months later when she had me sign power of attorney documents. Jessica made a small sound, something between a scoff and a gasp. "Your Honor, that's not fair. I didn't take over anything. I was helping my grieving mother who couldn't manage basic tasks." Judge Moore's gaze moved to Jessica with the weight of glacier ice. "Ms. Morgan, you'll have time to testify. Right now, I'm hearing from your mother. Mrs. Sullivan, continue." The validation of being allowed to finish my own sentences, of being treated like a competent adult instead of a confused elder, hit harder than I expected. I swallowed against the emotion and focused on the facts. My daughter set up what she called simplified online banking access. She told me technology had changed since my workdays, that I needed something easier to manage. What she actually did was change all my passwords, redirect all notifications to her email, and lock me out of my own accounts. "Objection, Your Honor. That's speculation and inflammatory language." Cooper was on his feet now, trying to regain control of a hearing that was sliding away from him. "Overruled. This is a conservatorship petition, Mr. Cooper, not a criminal trial. I need to understand the full picture. Mrs. Sullivan, did you attempt to access your accounts after your daughter made these changes?" "Yes, Your Honor, multiple times. The passwords didn't work. When I called Jessica to ask for access, she would log in for me, show me the balance, and tell me everything was fine. She never showed me the transaction history. She never let me see where the money was actually going." Jessica's voice went tight with barely controlled anger. "Because she would have been confused by it. She was grieving, she wasn't thinking clearly, and I was trying to protect her from additional stress." Judge Moore set down her pen with deliberate precision. "Ms. Morgan, grief is not a legal basis for conservatorship. Neither is stress. Your petition claims cognitive decline and financial mismanagement. So far, I'm hearing about a widow adjusting to loss while her daughter made unilateral decisions about her accounts. The small sound from the gallery was different this time. Not sympathy for poor, confused Catherine. Doubt about concerned daughter Jessica. I felt the shift like a physical thing. The narrative Jessica had spent 2 years building starting to crack under the weight of actual questions. Maggie leaned forward slightly. Your Honor, Mrs. Sullivan has documentation regarding account access, alert settings, and the timeline of changes. May we present it? Please. I reached for the folder Maggie slid across to me. Not thick, not dramatic, just organized evidence of systematic theft. I'd learned in my CFO years that the best presentations were clean, chronological, and impossible to argue with. Numbers didn't lie, even when people desperately wanted them to. The first page was a printout from the bank. Account alert preferences, change confirmation, with a date and timestamp that predated Jessica's carefully constructed story by 2 full weeks. I stood and walked to the bench, my movements controlled and deliberate. 62 years old, and my body still worked fine. My mind still functioned, my ability to present evidence intact despite my daughter's insistence that I was declining. Judge Moore took the document and read in silence. Her eyebrows rose fractionally. Ms. Morgan, this shows alert preferences were changed on May 28th. When did your mother sign the power of attorney documents you referenced? Jessica's face did something complicated. I don't remember the exact date, Your Honor. It was around that time, during the worst of her grief. Mr. Cooper, do you have the signed power of attorney documents? Cooper produced them with visible reluctance, and the judge compared dates. The room went very quiet. Even Robert stopped shifting in his seat, finally understanding that his wife had stepped into something she couldn't charm her way out of. The power of attorney is dated June 11th. The account alert changes are dated May 28th, 2 weeks prior. Judge Moore looked at Jessica with an expression that suggested every sympathetic assumption she'd been operating under had just evaporated. Ms. Morgan, how did you change your mother's account settings before she gave you legal authority to do so? She gave me her login information. She asked me to help. She wanted me to monitor things. Do you have that request in writing? It was verbal, Your Honor. My mother was in crisis. I was trying to help. I heard my own voice, calm and clear, cutting through Jessica's excuses like a knife through tissue paper. I never gave her my login information. I told her I could manage my own accounts. She insisted the technology was too complicated for someone my age. Jessica spun toward me, mask slipping further. Mom, you were falling apart. You couldn't function. Someone had to step in before you lost everything. Judge Moore's voice went sharp. Ms. Morgan, you're not helping your case. Mrs. Sullivan, return to your seat. I want to see the complete timeline. Maggie was already sliding the next set of documents toward me. Contact change logs from the bank, showing not just when things changed, but what changed. Email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses, all altered within a 3-day window at the end of May. All 2 weeks before I'd signed anything giving Jessica authority. The pattern was damning. Jessica hadn't waited for permission. She'd taken control and then manufactured the paperwork to make it look legitimate after the fact. She'd bet on my grief, my exhaustion, my willingness to believe my daughter had my best interests at heart. She'd bet wrong. This is the contact change log from Midwest Savings Bank. I placed it before the judge, pointed to the highlighted sections. My email was changed from my personal address to one Jessica created without my knowledge. My phone number was changed to hers. My mailing address was updated to my daughter's house, which meant I stopped receiving statements and notifications entirely. All dated May 28th through May 30th. Judge Moore made another notation. And you signed the power of attorney on June 11th. Under pressure, Your Honor. My daughter brought the documents to my house with her husband present. She told me it was standard, that everyone my age needed this kind of protection. She said if I trusted her, I'd sign. She made it very difficult to say no. Jessica's hands were shaking now, fine tremors she couldn't quite control. Your Honor, my mother is making this sound sinister. I was genuinely trying to help. She was not capable of managing things after Dad died. She admits she was grieving, overwhelmed. That's exactly why she needed someone to step in. With or without her actual consent, apparently. Judge Moore turned a page in her notes. Mrs. Sullivan, did you attempt to regain access to your accounts after you realized you'd been locked out? The memory was sharp enough to hurt. 10 months of increasing desperation, of being made to feel paranoid for wanting to see my own money, of watching my daughter position herself as the only thing standing between me and financial ruin, while she systematically drained my accounts. Yes. I called the bank when my credit cards were declined. That's when I learned Jessica had closed them all without telling me. I tried to reset my online passwords and discovered the security questions had been changed to information only Jessica would know. When I confronted her about it, she told me I was being difficult, that I was proving I couldn't handle the stress of managing my own affairs. How much money was in your accounts when your husband died, Mrs. Sullivan? The number hurt to say out loud. Richard's life insurance was $300,000. We had savings of approximately $150,000. The house was paid off, valued around $450,000. Total assets just under $900,000. A collective intake of breath from the gallery. That kind of money made Jessica's desperation make sense, made the conservatorship petition look less like concern and more like a grab for control of assets she'd already been stealing from. And your current accessible balance? $8,000 in checking. I don't have access to anything else. Jessica controls it all through the power of attorney I signed under what I now understand was false pretenses. Cooper stood again, and this time his voice carried an edge of desperation. Your Honor, even if there were irregularities in how the accounts were initially set up, the core issue remains. Mrs. Sullivan has demonstrated poor judgment, financial confusion, and inability to protect herself. That's why we're here. She needs protection, whether she recognizes it or not. Protection from whom, Mr. Cooper? Maggie's voice was mild, but the question landed like a bomb. From herself? Or from her daughter who's been systematically draining her accounts? Objection! Counsel is making accusations without evidence. Your Honor, I have the evidence right here. Maggie stood and approached the bench with another folder. Bank records showing every transaction for the past 18 months, broken down by category recipient and Jessica Morgan's own business entities. Jessica went very pale. Robert leaned forward, finally paying attention to something that might actually affect him. And I watched my daughter realize that her careful planning, her elaborate story about protecting her confused elderly mother, was about to collide with documents that told a very different tale. Judge Moore opened the folder and began to read. The silence stretched out, punctuated only by the sound of pages turning, and Cooper's increasingly agitated breathing. When the judge finally looked up, her expression was carefully neutral, but I'd spent enough time in high-stakes negotiations to recognize barely controlled anger when I saw it. Ms. Morgan, are you familiar with an entity called Senior Care Consulting LLC? Jessica's mouth opened and closed without sound. Robert's head swiveled toward his wife, confusion giving way to suspicion. In the gallery, I heard someone whisper a question, and someone else shush them. Yes, Your Honor, that's a consulting service I used to help manage my mother's care. It's registered to you. You're listed as the sole proprietor. I created it to keep things organized, for tax purposes. Everything was legitimate. According to these bank records, Senior Care Consulting received 12 payments totaling $78,000 from your mother's accounts. What services did this company provide? Jessica's face went through several colors. Care management, coordinating her needs, making sure she was safe. Your mother lives independently in her own home and, by all accounts until you filed this petition, was managing perfectly well. What care were you coordinating that required $78,000? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Jessica looked at Cooper, who suddenly seemed very interested in his legal pad. She looked at Robert, who was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. She looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes was rage, not remorse, anger that I dared to fight back, that I'd had the audacity to question her authority, that I'd refused to play the role of declining elder she'd written for me. I was protecting her assets, making sure nothing happened to them. By transferring them to your own company? To hold in trust, for safekeeping. Judge Moore closed the folder with a sound like a gavel. Ms. Morgan, that's not how trusts work. That's not how any of this works, Mrs. Sullivan, continue with your timeline. I returned to the witness area, and Maggie handed me the next document. This one was simpler, more direct, and in some ways more damning than all the bank records combined. A text message exchange, screenshots from my phone that I'd had the presence of mind to save before Jessica could delete them. The messages were from late May, right before I signed the power of attorney. Jessica's texts were a masterclass in manipulation, each one carefully crafted to make me doubt myself while positioning her as my only salvation. The judge read them aloud for the record, and hearing Jessica's words in the judicial voice made them sound even worse. "Mom, I know you're struggling. It's okay to admit you need help. Mom, I've been talking to Robert and we're worried about you. You're not yourself. Mom, please let me help you. That's all I want to do. Just help." Then my response is, grief-stricken and vulnerable. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just sad. I don't need help managing my life. Jessica, please, I can handle this." And Jessica's final text, the one that had convinced me to sign, "Dad wouldn't want you to struggle alone. He'd want you to let family help. Please, Mom, do it for him." The weaponization of my grief, packaged as love, the use of my dead husband's memory to manipulate me into surrendering control. It was all there in black and white, time-stamped and saved, impossible to explain away as anything but calculated pressure. Judge Moore set down the phone screenshots and looked at Jessica with something close to contempt. "Ms. Morgan, you used your mother's grief over her husband's death to pressure her into signing documents that gave you control of her finances." "I was trying to help." "Help yourself, apparently." Cooper tried one more time. "Your Honor, my client's methods may have been overzealous, but her intentions were good, Mrs. Sullivan was genuinely struggling, and Jessica stepped in out of love and concern. "Mr. Cooper, I've been presiding over elder law cases for 2 decades. I know the difference between concern and exploitation. Your client changed her mother's account access before obtaining legal authority, created a company to funnel money out of her mother's accounts, and used grief as a weapon to force compliance. That's not overzealous. That's financial abuse." The words landed like stones in water, ripples spreading outward. In the gallery, Diane was crying silently, vindicated in her suspicions. Aunt Patricia looked stricken. Robert's face had gone from confused to furious, doing math in his head about where $78,000 had gone while he thought they were struggling. Jessica stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. My mother is lying. She's confused and paranoid and turning everyone against me because she can't accept that she's getting old and needs help." Judge Moore's voice cut through the outburst like a blade. "Sit down, Ms. Morgan. You're not helping yourself." "She's manipulating you, all of you. She's making me sound like some kind of criminal when all I did was try to protect her from herself." "Ms. Morgan, sit down now, or I will hold you in contempt." Jessica sat, but the damage was done. The careful mask of concerned daughter had shattered completely, revealing the entitled, desperate woman underneath, and everyone in the courtroom had seen it happen. Maggie stood, calm as deep water. "Your Honor, we have additional documentation. Medical evaluation completed yesterday by Dr. Sarah Chen, board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. She examined Mrs. Sullivan for 4 hours, conducted comprehensive cognitive testing, and found absolutely no evidence of decline, dementia, or impaired judgment. The report went to the judge, and I watched her read it with something like satisfaction. When she looked up, she addressed Jessica directly. Your petition lists cognitive decline as a primary basis for conservatorship. This evaluation contradicts that entirely. Mrs. Sullivan scored in the 95th percentile for memory and executive function. Dr. Chen notes that her organizational skills, financial understanding, and decision-making capacity are all completely normal for her age. Better than normal, actually. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. She's 62. She's old. I'm 64, Ms. Morgan. Am I incompetent? The question was rhetorical, but it highlighted the core of Jessica's argument, that age alone was evidence of decline, that reaching 60 meant surrendering autonomy to younger people who thought they knew better. It was ageism dressed up as concern, and Judge Moore wasn't buying it. Your Honor, if I may, Maggie's voice was respectful but firm. We'd like to present one additional piece of evidence. A letter written by Richard Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan's late husband, 1 year before his death. It was kept in a safety deposit box that Mrs. Sullivan only recently learned existed. Jessica went very still. Cooper looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't figure out the grounds. And I pulled the letter from my purse, unfolded it carefully, and handed it to the bailiff. Richard's handwriting on the page, his words, his warning, his final gift to me from beyond the grave. Judge Moore read it in silence, and I watched her expression shift from professional neutrality to something harder. When she finished, she looked at Jessica with eyes that had seen through to the core of things. "Your father knew about your financial troubles, Ms. Morgan. He documented them. He was concerned enough about your behavior that he created a failsafe for your mother, in case you tried exactly what you're trying now. That's not fair. He didn't understand. He was old too, and he didn't—" "Stop talking." Judge Moore's voice could have frozen fire. "Your father was 65 when he died. Your mother is 62. I'm 64. At what age exactly do you believe people become incompetent? Or is it just whenever they have something you want?" The question echoed in the silent courtroom. No one moved, no one breathed, and Jessica, for the first time in 2 years, had absolutely nothing to say. Judge Moore turned to me, and her voice gentled. "Mrs. Sullivan, you mentioned you froze your credit and filed reports. Walk me through what you did once you realized what was happening." This part was easier. Facts instead of emotions, actions instead of accusations. I discovered the unauthorized account access in early August. Within 24 hours, I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, filed an identity theft report with the FTC, and contacted Adult Protective Services to report financial abuse. I also retained Ms. Harrison and began gathering documentation. "Did you file a police report?" "Yes, Your Honor, for documentation purposes. Detective Williams at the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department has the case file." Jessica made a strangled sound. Cooper put a hand on her arm, trying to keep her quiet, but she shook him off. "You filed a police report? Against your own daughter?" I looked at her directly for the first time since the hearing started. "You stole from me, Jessica. You used my grief and my age and my love for you as tools to rob me blind. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to trust me. I'm your daughter. I was trying to help you." "You were trying to help yourself to my money. There's a difference." The words came out colder than I'd intended, but they were true. Jessica had never been helping me. She'd been helping herself while telling a story about elder care and family duty and protecting her confused mother. And she'd almost gotten away with it. Judge Moore made several notations, then addressed both attorneys. "I'm going to take a short recess. When we return, I want a complete accounting of every transaction from Mrs. Sullivan's accounts for the past 18 months. Mr. Cooper, your client will need to provide documentation for every payment to Senior Care Consulting and any other entity she controls. Ms. Harrison, I assume you have the bank records organized?" "Completely, Your Honor, by date, category, and recipient. We can also provide evidence of additional business entities registered to Jessica Morgan that received funds from her mother's accounts." Jessica's face went from pale to gray. Robert stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking at his wife. And I sat there thinking about 40 years of marriage to a man who'd known our daughter better than I had, who tried to protect me from her even after his death. The recess lasted 30 minutes. When we returned, Maggie presented the complete financial breakdown. It was worse than I'd thought, and I thought it was bad. Senior Care Consulting LLC, owned by Jessica Morgan, $78,000. Home Safety Solutions, Jessica Morgan listed as agent, $43,000. Elder Support Services, registered to Jessica Morgan's business address, $31,000. Various transfers labeled medical expenses, home repairs, and care management with no supporting documentation, $35,000. Total unauthorized transfers, $187,000 over 18 months. The numbers landed like body blows. Judge Moore read through the documentation with increasing focus, making notes, cross-referencing dates. When she looked up, she addressed Cooper directly. Your client has been systematically stealing from her mother while filing a petition claiming the mother is incompetent. Do you have any explanation for this that doesn't constitute elder financial abuse? Cooper's professional polish had worn away completely. Your Honor, I was not aware of the full extent of the financial complexity when I accepted this case. I believed in good faith that Ms. Morgan's concerns about her mother were legitimate. And now? Now I'm questioning that belief. Jessica grabbed his arm. You're supposed to be defending me. I'm supposed to be representing your interests within the bounds of the law, Ms. Morgan. I'm not supposed to help you defraud your mother. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Moore brought the gavel down once, hard, and silence fell immediately. Ms. Morgan, I'm denying your petition for conservatorship. The evidence shows clearly that your mother is competent, capable, and has taken appropriate steps to protect herself from financial abuse. The only person who appears to need supervision here is you. Jessica stood again, her voice rising to something close to a scream. You can't do this. She's old. She's confused. She needs me. She needs you to stop stealing from her. Sit down. This is insane. I'm her daughter. I love her. I was only trying to... Ms. Morgan, sit down or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Jessica didn't sit. She turned to me, and her face was twisted with something I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. Uncomplicated by love or history or the 35 years I'd spent raising her. You did this. You turned everyone against me. You couldn't just accept that you're too old to manage your own life, so you destroyed mine instead. I met her eyes and felt nothing but exhaustion. I didn't destroy your life, Jessica. I just refused to let you destroy mine. The bailiff stepped forward, ready to intervene if Jessica escalated further, but she just stood there, shaking with rage, her carefully constructed story in ruins around her. Judge Moore's voice cut through the tension. Ms. Morgan, I'm issuing an order effective immediately. You are prohibited from accessing, controlling, or in any way managing your mother's financial accounts. All access privileges are hereby revoked. The bank will be notified today. Additionally, I'm ordering a full forensic accounting of all transactions to be completed within 30 days. Any funds determined to have been taken without legitimate purpose are to be returned to Mrs. Sullivan immediately. I don't have that kind of money. Then you should have thought of that before you stole it. Judge Moore turned to me. Mrs. Sullivan, you are free to manage your own affairs. The court finds no basis for conservatorship, guardianship, or any limitation on your legal capacity. Your daughter's petition is denied in its entirety. The relief hit me like a wave, but it was complicated by grief. This was my daughter. The baby I'd rocked through nightmares. The child I'd taught to ride a bike. The young woman I'd helped move into her first apartment. And she'd tried to take everything from me because she thought being 62 meant I didn't deserve autonomy anymore. Judge Moore continued, I'm also referring this case to the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, even when that adult is your parent, is a crime in Pennsylvania. Jessica finally sat down, or maybe collapsed. Cooper was already gathering his files, distancing himself from a case that had gone from questionable to criminal. And in the gallery, I saw Emma watching her mother with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition that the grandmother she'd been told was confused and declining was actually sharp enough to fight back and win. The hearing concluded with orders about account restoration and documentation requirements. Maggie walked me out of the courtroom into the harsh afternoon light, and I stood on the courthouse steps feeling like I'd aged a decade in 3 hours. You did well in there. Maggie's voice was kind. I just told the truth. The truth, backed by documentation. That's what wins these cases. Not emotion, not family loyalty. Evidence. Behind us, the courthouse doors opened, and Jessica emerged with Cooper. She saw me and stopped, and for a moment I thought she might apologize, might recognize what she'd done, what she'd tried to do, what we'd lost in the process. Instead, she walked past me without a word, got into her BMW, and drove away. Robert's car was already gone from the parking lot, and I stood there thinking about the cost of fighting back, the price of proving competence, the toll of winning a battle I should never have had to fight. Maggie touched my arm gently. She might try to contact you. Don't engage without me present. I won't. And get your account secured immediately. Change everything. New banks if necessary. Lock her out completely. I will. Good. Maggie smiled, tired but satisfied. Go home, Catherine. To your house, your life, your autonomy. You earned it. I drove home through streets I'd navigated for 35 years, pulled into the driveway of the house I'd nearly lost, and sat in my car while the engine ticked cool. Through the living room window, I could see the photo of Richard and me on our wedding day, still sitting on the mantel where it had been for decades. He'd known this was coming. He'd tried to protect me from it. And in the end, his final gift had been the proof I needed to protect myself. Inside, I changed every password, called every bank, closed accounts Jessica had touched, and opened new ones at institutions she didn't know about. I notarized new medical directives with explicit instructions about who could and couldn't make decisions on my behalf. I updated my will to reflect the reality of a daughter who'd chosen theft over trust. It took hours. It was exhausting. And it was the most empowering thing I'd done since Richard died. By the time I finished, it was dark outside. I made myself dinner, sat at my kitchen table alone, and thought about justice and family, and the particular kind of betrayal that comes from people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. My phone buzzed with a text. Emma. Grandma, I'm proud of you. Mom was wrong. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I stared at the message for a long time. Almost 17 years old, and already learning that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. I hoped she'd learn the other lesson too, that being older didn't mean being obsolete, that 62 was not the same as incompetent, that you could fight back even when everyone expected you to surrender quietly. I texted back, "Thank you, sweetheart. Your grandfather would be proud of you too." Because Richard had trusted Emma with that safety deposit key, had known even at 14 she was capable of keeping a secret and recognizing when it needed to be revealed. He'd seen strength in his granddaughter, the same way he'd always seen strength in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine again. My space, my rules, my life. At 62, I'd just proven to a courtroom full of people that age didn't equal incompetence. That documentation beat narrative, that a woman who'd spent 40 years managing corporate finances could absolutely manage her own checkbook, despite her daughter's insistence otherwise. Tomorrow, I'd deal with the forensic accounting and the criminal referral, and the reality of a daughter who might face charges. Tonight, I sat in my kitchen and understood something Richard had known all along, that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage you could have. Jessica had assumed I was too old, too grief-stricken, too trusting to fight back. She'd built her entire scheme on that assumption. She'd been wrong about all of it. The documentation was complete. The evidence had spoken. And I was just getting started. The forensic accountant's report arrived 3 weeks after the hearing, delivered to Maggie's office in a manila envelope thick enough to qualify as a weapon. I sat across from her desk while she reviewed it page by page, her expression growing progressively darker. Outside the window, October rain streaked the glass and made the afternoon feel later than it was. $192,417. Maggie looked up from the report. That's the total. 17 transactions we didn't catch in the initial review. She was very thorough. The number should have shocked me. It didn't. Jessica had always been thorough when it mattered to her, and stealing from her elderly mother had apparently mattered a great deal. Can I get it back? Maggie tapped the report with one finger. Some of it. The court order requires her to return funds, but she's claiming she doesn't have liquid assets. The BMW is leased. The house has a second mortgage she took out without Robert's knowledge. Most of the money went to covering gambling debts. That part did surprise me. Gambling? Online poker, high-stakes tables. The forensic accountant traced the senior care consulting payments to 3 different gambling websites. She was trying to win enough to pay back what she'd taken before you noticed. Instead, she lost more and went deeper into your accounts to cover the losses. I sat back in the chair and tried to process this new layer of betrayal. My daughter hadn't just stolen from me out of entitlement or greed. She'd stolen to feed an addiction I didn't know she had, then filed for conservatorship to maintain access when I started asking questions. The complexity of the deception was almost impressive. What happens now? The district attorney's office has the case. Detective Williams called this morning. They're proceeding with charges: financial exploitation of a senior, identity theft, fraud. Jessica's looking at felony counts. The weight of it settled over me like a physical thing. My daughter might go to prison because she'd decided her 62-year-old mother was too incompetent to notice being robbed. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Has she tried to contact you? I pulled out my phone and showed Maggie the blocked call log. 47 attempts in 3 weeks. No voicemails, just the desperate repetition of someone who couldn't accept that the door had closed. She's blocked. I changed my number, but she got the new one somehow, probably from Emma. Has Emma been in touch? Every few days. She's processing everything. Robert filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. Jessica's living with her mother-in-law, which apparently is going about as well as you'd expect. Maggie made a note on her legal pad. The accountant also found evidence that Jessica forged your signature on the second mortgage application. That's an additional charge. Robert's attorney wants a statement from you confirming you didn't authorize it. I thought about Robert, who I'd always liked despite his weaknesses. He'd been blindsided by all of this, married to a woman he thought he knew who turned out to be someone else entirely. Now he was fighting to keep the house while his wife faced criminal charges and their daughter watched her family implode. I'll provide whatever he needs. The rain picked up outside, drumming against the window hard enough to rattle the glass. Maggie closed the file and looked at me with the expression she wore when she was about to say something I wouldn't like. Catherine, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Jessica will escalate. Cornered people do unpredictable things. The criminal charges, the divorce, losing access to your money. She's losing everything. That makes her dangerous. She's my daughter, not a criminal mastermind. She's your daughter who committed multiple felonies and has nothing left to lose. Please be careful. I promised I would. Signed the necessary documents and drove home through rain that turned the roads into rivers. Inside my house, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with Richard's letter spread out in front of me. I'd read it so many times the creases were starting to tear, but I kept coming back to one particular line. Don't let her use your age against you. He'd known, not just about Jessica's financial troubles, but about how she'd weaponize my being older, how she'd turn 62 into a diagnosis, how she'd convince everyone that grief plus age equaled incompetence. He'd seen it coming and left me the tools to fight back. My phone buzzed. Emma, can I come over? I need to talk to you about something. 20 minutes later, my granddaughter sat across from me in the same chair where Jessica had pressured me into signing away my autonomy. Emma was almost 17, but carried herself with a gravity that made her seem older. She'd inherited my bone structure and Richard's steady gaze, and watching her struggle with the knowledge of what her mother had done was like watching myself at that age trying to make sense of adult failures. Mom called me last night, from Grandma Morgan's house. I waited, letting Emma set the pace. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry, that she was trying to help and everything got out of hand, that if you just dropped the charges, she'd pay everything back. The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been funny if it wasn't heartbreaking. Jessica knew I'd never take her calls, so she'd used Emma as a messenger, betting on the fact that I wouldn't want to put my granddaughter in the middle. What did you tell her? Emma's hands twisted in her lap. I told her you can't drop charges you didn't file, that the district attorney decides that, and that maybe if she'd actually been sorry, she wouldn't have tried to steal almost $200,000 from her own mother. Pride and grief hit me simultaneously. Pride that Emma could see through the manipulation, grief that she had to. How are you handling all of this? I'm angry. The words came out fierce. I'm angry that she did this to you. I'm angry that she lied to Dad. I'm angry that she used your age like it meant you were stupid. And I'm angry that everyone just believed her because she's younger and you're 62. Like that's supposed to mean something. There it was, the core wound Jessica had inflicted, not just on me, but on Emma's understanding of how the world worked. The realization that being older meant being vulnerable to dismissal, that family could betray you, that the people who were supposed to protect you might be the ones you needed protection from. Your mother is sick, Emma. Addiction is a disease. Don't defend her. The sharpness in Emma's voice surprised me. She stood up and paced to the window, her reflection dark against the rain-streaked glass. Grandpa knew. That's what kills me. He knew Mom had problems, and he tried to protect you, and he died before he could warn you himself. So he left me that key and made me promise not to tell anyone until you needed it. Do you know how hard it was to keep that secret? To watch her take over your life and know I had something that could stop her? But Grandpa said to wait. The anguish in her voice was raw and real. I stood and went to her, put my hand on her shoulder, the way I'd done when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. You kept your promise to your grandfather. You gave me that key exactly when I needed it. You did the right thing. It doesn't feel right. It feels like I let her hurt you. You didn't let her do anything. Jessica made her choices. Your grandfather made his, and I made mine when I decided to fight back instead of accepting her narrative. None of that is on you. Emma turned, and her eyes were wet with tears she was trying not to shed. She keeps saying you're trying to destroy her, that you're being vindictive and cruel, that this whole thing is about you not being able to accept that you need help. The narrative hadn't changed. Jessica was still painting herself as the concerned daughter, and me as the unreasonable elder. The only difference was that now there was a courtroom record, a forensic accounting report, and criminal charges that said otherwise. Do you believe her? Emma's answer was immediate and certain. No. Then that's all that matters. Your mother is going to face consequences for what she did. That's not me being vindictive. That's the legal system working the way it's supposed to. She stole from me, forged documents, committed fraud. The fact that I'm her mother doesn't make those things okay. I know, Emma's voice broke. I just wish she was different. I wish she was the person she pretends to be. I pulled my granddaughter into a hug and felt her shake with sobs she'd been holding back for weeks. This was the real casualty of Jessica's choices. Not the money, not the court case, not even the criminal charges. It was Emma's loss of faith in her mother, the shattering of a relationship that should have been safe and unconditional. When Emma finally pulled back, her face was blotchy, but her voice was steady. Grandma, can I ask you something? Anything. How did you know? How did you know to save all those documents and freeze your credit and fight back instead of just accepting it? The question was more complicated than it seemed. How had I known? What instinct or experience or moment of clarity had made me recognize Jessica's help as theft instead of care? I spent 40 years in rooms full of people who underestimated me. When I was young, they said I was too inexperienced. When I was middle-aged, they said I was too emotional. When I got older, they said I was out of touch. I learned to recognize when someone was dismissing my competence, and I learned to prove them wrong with documentation. Emma nodded slowly, processing this. Is that what I should do? Document everything? Yes, but more than that, trust yourself. Your mother told me I was confused and declining and needed her help, and for a while I almost believed her. Don't let anyone make you doubt your own reality, especially not people who are supposed to love you. My granddaughter hugged me again, tighter this time, and I thought about generational patterns. I'd spent my career fighting to be taken seriously. Jessica had spent her life resenting that I'd fought instead of stayed home. And now Emma was learning that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you have to protect yourself from. It was a bitter lesson for almost 17, but better to learn it young than to be vulnerable at 62. The district attorney's office called the next week. Detective Williams wanted to meet, and I drove to the county building on a Tuesday morning feeling like I was betraying my daughter, even though logic said she'd betrayed herself. Williams was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a notebook that was already half full when I arrived. She gestured me to a chair in a conference room that smelled like industrial cleaner and bad coffee. "Mrs. Sullivan, thank you for coming in. I know this must be difficult." "It's necessary." She nodded, appreciating the distinction. "I've reviewed the forensic accounting report and the court documents. Your daughter's attorney has reached out about a plea arrangement." My stomach tightened. What kind of arrangement? Restitution in exchange for reduced charges. She'd plead guilty to fraud and identity theft, agree to pay back everything with a structured payment plan, and get probation instead of prison time. When part of me felt relief, prison seemed like such a harsh outcome for a woman who'd convinced herself she was helping. But another part, the part that had spent 3 weeks changing passwords and looking over my shoulder, remembered that Jessica had shown no remorse, only anger that I'd fought back. "What do you recommend?" Williams leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. "Legally, I can't tell you what to do. This isn't your decision. It's the DA's. But I can tell you that cases like this are complicated. Juries are sympathetic to daughters who say they were trying to help aging parents. Even with strong evidence, there's risk. Risk that she'd be acquitted? Risk that a jury would see an elderly woman, no offense, turning on her own daughter over money. Your daughter's attorney is good. He'll paint this as a family dispute, not a crime. He'll emphasize your age, your grief, your isolation. He'll suggest you're confused about what you authorized." The ageism was baked into every level of the system. Even with documentation, even with Judge Moore's ruling, even with forensic evidence, there would be people who looked at 62-year-old me and 35-year-old Jessica and assumed the younger one must be telling the truth. "So you think I should agree to the plea?" "I think you should understand what trial would mean. Cross-examination about your memory, your capacity, your relationship with your daughter. They'll bring in experts to testify about age-related cognitive changes. They'll make you defend your competence in front of 12 strangers. Even if we win, it'll be brutal." I sat in that conference room and thought about what winning would cost. The public testimony, the media attention, the spectacle of a mother and daughter fighting in criminal court. Jessica would use every weapon she had, and age discrimination was her sharpest blade. What would the restitution timeline look like? Williams consulted her notes. Monthly payments over 10 years. She'd have to get a real job, maintain employment, provide proof of payment. If she misses more than 2 payments, the plea is void and prosecution proceeds. 10 years of monthly reminders that my daughter had stolen from me. 10 years of wondering if this would be the month she stopped paying, forcing me back into court. 10 years of her presence in my financial life, when all I wanted was to be free of her manipulation. But the alternative was worse. A trial where my age became evidence against me, where Jessica's lawyer turned my competence into a question mark, where the jury saw a vindictive mother instead of a victimized one. "I'll think about it." Williams nodded, understanding. "Take your time. But Mrs. Sullivan, whatever you decide, you did the right thing. Fighting back, I mean. Most people in your situation don't. They let their kids take everything because they're ashamed or scared or convinced they're too old to know better. You proved them all wrong." The validation helped, but it couldn't erase the cost. I drove home through streets that were starting to show autumn colors and thought about justice versus peace, vindication versus closure, winning versus being free. That night, Robert called. We hadn't spoken since the hearing, and his voice on the phone was strained with exhaustion. "Catherine, I owe you an apology." I sat down heavily on my couch, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "You didn't know what she was doing." "I should have known. The money she spent, the debt I didn't know about, the way she talked about you like you were incompetent. I should have seen it. I was lazy, and I let her handle everything, and she used that to steal from you." "Robert, you're not responsible for your wife's choices." "She's not my wife anymore. The divorce is final next week, and I need you to know that Emma's been staying with me. Jessica's living with my mother temporarily, and that situation is not sustainable." She's angry all the time, blaming everyone but herself. I heard the fear under his words. Fear that Jessica would escalate, that her anger would find a target, that being cornered would make her unpredictable. Has she threatened you? Not directly, but she keeps saying things about how everyone turned on her, how you poisoned Emma against her, how the courts and the lawyers and the accountants are all working together to destroy her life. She won't accept responsibility for anything. Classic Jessica. Reality was something that happened to other people. What are you going to do? Robert's sigh was long and heavy. I'm moving, taking Emma with me. My company offered a transfer to their Pittsburgh office, and I'm taking it. I need distance from this mess, and Emma needs to not be caught between her mother and everyone else. The news hit harder than I expected. Emma leaving felt like losing another piece of Richard, another connection to the life I'd built before everything fell apart. When? End of November. I know it's fast, but I can't stay here. Every time I see Jessica, I remember how she lied to me for years, how she risked our house, our future, Emma's college fund. I need a clean start. Does Emma know? I'm telling her tonight. I wanted to call you first because I know you two have gotten close through all this. I don't want her to lose that relationship. My throat went tight with emotion I couldn't quite name. She won't. We'll video chat. I'll drive to Pittsburgh. She's my granddaughter, Robert. Distance doesn't change that. Thank you. His voice cracked slightly. For everything. For not pressing charges against me for the second mortgage fraud. For understanding that I was a victim in this too. For being kind to Emma when her world is falling apart. You're a good father. Emma's lucky to have you. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and thought about loss. Richard gone, Jessica gone, though in a different way. And now Emma leaving, moving 3 hours away to start over with a father who was trying to outrun his wife's crimes. The house felt enormous again, empty in ways it hadn't since those first weeks after Richard died. I'd won the court case, protected my money, proven my competence, but the victory was lonely and complicated and stained with grief I couldn't quite process. My phone buzzed. Diane, are you home? I'm bringing dinner. Don't argue. She showed up 20 minutes later with Thai food and the determined expression she wore when she was staging an intervention. We ate in my kitchen while rain started up again outside, and she didn't ask questions until the containers were empty. How are you really doing? The honest answer was too complicated, so I gave her the simple version. I'm fine. The legal stuff is moving forward. Jessica might take a plea deal. That's not what I asked. Diane had known me for 30 years, long enough to see through polite deflection. I set down my fork and met her eyes. I'm tired. I proved I'm competent and capable and not declining, but the proving took everything I had. And now I'm sitting in this house alone wondering what I won exactly. You won your freedom, your autonomy, your right to manage your own life. I know, but it feels like I lost my daughter in the process. Diane reached across the table and took my hand. Kat, you didn't lose Jessica. She lost herself. You just refused to go down with her. The distinction mattered, but it didn't make the loneliness less real. Emma's moving to Pittsburgh with Robert. That's probably smart. She needs distance from her mother's drama. I know. But it's one more person leaving, one more empty space. Richard's gone, Jessica's gone, Emma's leaving, and I'm 62 and alone in a house I fought to keep but don't know what to do with. Diane squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. You're 62 and independent in a house you own outright, with money you protected from theft. You have friends, you have your granddaughter, even if she's 3 hours away, and you have a whole second act ahead of you if you're brave enough to write it. The words hit something in me that had been dormant for years. A second act. Not just survival, not just maintenance, but actually building something new. I'd spent 40 years building a career, then 35 raising a family, then 2 years fighting to keep what was mine. What came next? I don't know how to start. Yes, you do. You start the same way you started everything else, one step at a time with documentation. We both laughed, and it felt good to laugh about something that had been weaponized against me. My habit of keeping records, of tracking details, of documenting everything. Jessica had tried to frame it as obsessive behavior, proof of declining mental capacity. But it had been my salvation, the evidence that spoke when words weren't enough. Diane stayed until late, helping me clean up and talking about nothing important. And when she left, I didn't feel quite as alone. The house was still empty, but empty wasn't the same as abandoned. Empty was potential, space to be filled with whatever I decided mattered now. The plea hearing was scheduled for mid-November. Jessica would appear before Judge Moore, admit to fraud and identity theft, agree to restitution, and accept 5 years probation. No prison time if she complied with all conditions. Prison if she violated the agreement. I wasn't required to attend, but Maggie thought I should be there. She needs to see you. Needs to understand that you're not going away, that you're watching, that this isn't over just because she avoids trial. So I sat in the same courtroom where I'd fought for my autonomy 6 weeks earlier and watched my daughter stand before a judge and admit she'd committed crimes against her own mother. She wore a conservative suit, her hair pulled back, her makeup minimal, playing the part of remorseful daughter who'd made mistakes. Judge Moore read the terms of the plea agreement with clinical precision. $192,000 in restitution, paid in monthly installments of $1,600 for 10 years. Mandatory employment, random financial audits, no contact with Catherine Sullivan without explicit written permission. Violation of any term would result in immediate prosecution on original charges. Ms. Morgan, do you understand these terms? Jessica's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Do you admit that you knowingly and intentionally transferred funds from your mother's accounts without authorization? A pause, long enough to hurt. Yes. Do you admit that you changed account access credentials without your mother's knowledge or consent? Yes. Do you admit that you forged your mother's signature on mortgage documents? Another pause. Yes. And do you understand that this plea agreement is contingent on full compliance with all terms, including restitution payments and the no-contact order? Yes, Your Honor. And Judge Moore signed the order and looked at Jessica with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not sympathy, not quite contempt, something closer to disappointment. Ms. Morgan, you're fortunate your mother is willing to accept this agreement. Many victims would push for prison time. I suggest you honor her mercy by actually following through on your commitments. Jessica nodded, and I saw her eyes flick toward me for just a second. What I saw there wasn't remorse. It was resentment. Anger that I'd reduced her to this, that I'd forced her to stand in court and admit wrongdoing, that I hadn't quietly accepted being robbed like a good elderly mother should. The hearing ended. Jessica left with her attorney without looking at me again. And I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom thinking about mercy and justice and whether there was really any difference when the person you were being merciful to would rather you were dead. Maggie walked me to my car. You okay? I don't know what I am. That's fair. This kind of closure isn't really closure. It's just a different kind of ongoing. 10 years of monthly payments. 10 years of wondering if Jessica would comply or violate and force us back here. 10 years of her presence in my life as a criminal rather than a daughter. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was the ending that protected me while giving her a chance to make things right. Whether she'd take that chance was an open question. Emma's going-away dinner was at an Italian place near Robert's house, small and warm and filled with the kind of noise that comes from families who aren't falling apart. Emma had invited me, Diane, and a few of her school friends. Jessica wasn't mentioned, her absence loud in its completeness. I watched my granddaughter laugh with her friends and saw flashes of the woman she'd become. Strong, aware, cautious in ways almost 17-year-olds shouldn't have to be, but capable of protecting herself because she'd learned early that even family could betray you. After dinner, Emma walked me to my car. The November air was cold enough to make our breath visible, and she pulled her jacket tight around herself. I'm going to miss you, Grandma. I'm going to miss you too. But Pittsburgh isn't that far. I'll visit. Promise? Promise. And you can come stay with me during breaks if you want. The house is yours anytime. Emma nodded, but her eyes were troubled. Can I ask you something that might be hard? Always. Do you think Mom will ever get better? Like actually better, not just pretending? The question deserved honesty, not comfort. I don't know. Addiction is complicated. Recovery requires admitting you have a problem, and your mother hasn't admitted that yet. Right now, she's angry at everyone else for the consequences of her own choices. So, probably not. Maybe not now. But people can change if they want to badly enough. The question is whether your mother wants to. Emma leaned against my car, looking up at the stars that were barely visible through the light pollution. I used to think families were supposed to be safe, like that was the whole point. But Grandpa knew Mom was dangerous and had to leave you a safety deposit key. You had to go to court to stop your own daughter from stealing from you. Dad's getting divorced and moving us 3 hours away. Nothing about this feels safe. I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. Family should be safe, but when it's not, you find safety in other ways. You document things, you trust yourself, you build relationships with people who earn that trust instead of demanding it, and you remember that being related to someone doesn't mean you owe them access to hurt you. Is that what you're going to do? Build new relationships? The question surprised me. I don't know. I've been so focused on survival that I haven't thought about what comes next. You should think about it. You're 62, not dead. You could do anything. The casual certainty in her voice made me smile. To almost 17, 62 probably seemed ancient. But Emma was right about one thing. I'd spent 2 years being defined by grief and 6 weeks being defined by fighting back. Maybe it was time to be defined by moving forward. What do you think I should do? Emma considered this seriously. Something that makes you happy. Something that has nothing to do with Mom or what she tried to take from you. Something that's just yours. We stood in the parking lot while the restaurant emptied around us, and I thought about second acts and new chapters, and the particular kind of freedom that comes from surviving something that was supposed to destroy you. I'll figure it out. Good, and Grandma, thank you for fighting back, for showing me that being older doesn't mean being powerless, and that you can stand up to people even when they're family. I'm going to remember that. She hugged me tight, and I understood that this was the real victory. Not the court case or the money or even my proven competence. It was Emma learning that she could fight back, that documentation mattered, that age didn't equal incompetence, that family obligation didn't trump self-protection. I'd given my granddaughter a blueprint for survival, and that was worth more than any amount Jessica could ever pay back. Christmas came quietly. I spent it with Diane and her family, grateful for the invitation and surprised by how much I enjoyed myself. No performance, no walking on eggshells, no managing Jessica's mood, just food and laughter, and the kind of peace that comes from being around people who see you as competent rather than declining. Emma called from Pittsburgh, happy in a way she hadn't been in months. She'd made new friends, joined the debate team, started looking at colleges. Robert had a girlfriend, someone kind who treated Emma well. They were building something new from the wreckage Jessica had left behind. Jessica made her first restitution payment in December, $1,600 exactly on time, accompanied by no note or communication. Just money transferred to my account, proof that she was complying with the plea agreement, if not actually accepting responsibility. I deposited it and tried not to think about the $190,000 still outstanding, the 10 years of payments stretching ahead, the constant reminder of what my daughter had done. In January, I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I signed up for a class, creative writing at the community college, Wednesday evenings, taught by a retired journalist who encouraged us to write what we knew. I wrote about corporate politics and gender discrimination and what it felt like to be underestimated for 4 decades. I wrote about Richard and grief and the particular loneliness of widowhood. I wrote about Jessica and theft and ageism disguised as concern. The other students were varied ages, some younger, some older, all there because they wanted to create something that mattered to them. Nobody asked if I was too old to be learning new things. Nobody suggested I should be home resting instead of challenging myself. They just read my work and offered feedback and treated me like a person instead of an elderly woman. It was revolutionary. By March, I'd written 50 pages of what might become a memoir. The instructor encouraged me to keep going, said there was a market for stories about elder financial abuse, about women reclaiming autonomy, about fighting systems designed to dismiss you. People need to hear this, especially older women who think they're alone in being underestimated. I thought about all the women my age who'd been convinced by their children that they were too incompetent to manage their own lives. All the widows who'd surrendered their autonomy because grief made them vulnerable. All the people who believed the narrative that 62 meant declining instead of continuing. If my story could help even one person fight back, document properly, refuse to accept ageist assumptions, then maybe everything Jessica had done would have meaning beyond just my personal trauma. I kept writing. Jessica violated the no-contact order in April. Not dramatically, not violently, just showed up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon and rang the doorbell like she had every right to be there. I saw her through the window, standing on my porch in jeans and a sweatshirt, looking tired and older than 35. For a moment, I almost opened the door, almost let maternal instinct override self-protection, almost believed that maybe she'd come to apologize, to actually take responsibility, to be the daughter I'd once thought I had. Then I remembered the courtroom, the forensic accounting, the 2 years of systematic theft. I picked up my phone and called Maggie. Jessica's at my house. She's violating the no-contact order. Don't open the door. I'm calling her probation officer now. Jessica rang the bell again, knocked, called out through the door. Mom, please, I just want to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I stood in my own entryway, silent, while my daughter begged for access she'd legally forfeited. Part of me wanted to give in, but a larger part, the part that had learned to protect itself, understood that opening that door meant letting the manipulations start again. Mom, I know you're in there. Your car's in the driveway, please. I'm trying to make things right. I've been making the payments. I'm doing everything the court said. Can't you just give me a chance? The probation officer arrived 15 minutes later. I watched through the window as Jessica was escorted away, protesting that she just wanted to talk to her mother, that this was cruel, that I was being vindictive. The officer's report noted the violation. Jessica was given a formal warning, one more contact attempt, and the plea agreement would be void, prosecution would proceed, prison time would become real. She didn't contact me again after that. But I heard through Robert that she'd moved into her mother-in-law's basement, that she was working retail and barely making the restitution payments, that she'd started telling people I'd ruined her life over money. The narrative never changed. She was still the victim. I was still the unreasonable one. And the fact that a court, a forensic accountant, and a criminal prosecution said otherwise didn't matter to her constructed reality. I stopped waiting for her to acknowledge what she'd done, stopped hoping for the apology that would never come, stopped defining myself by the absence of a relationship that had always been more idea than reality. Jessica had been my daughter. She'd also been someone who saw my age as weakness, my grief as opportunity, my trust as something to exploit. Both things were true, and accepting that paradox was harder than any court case. By summer, I'd finished the memoir, 180 pages about career sexism, widowhood, financial abuse, and fighting back against a system designed to dismiss older women. My writing instructor connected me with an agent who specialized in narrative nonfiction. This is exactly the kind of story people need right now. Elder abuse is epidemic, and most victims never report it. You're giving them a roadmap. The agent sold the book in August. Not for a fortune, but enough to matter. Enough to prove that at 63, I could still create something valuable, that my experience had worth beyond just my personal survival. Emma called when she heard screaming with excitement. "Grandma, you're going to be published! This is amazing!" "It's just a small press, sweetheart. Don't get too excited." "Are you kidding? You wrote a whole book. After everything Mom put you through, you turned it into something that's going to help other people. Grandpa would be so proud." The mention of Richard hit harder than I expected. I wished he could see this, could know that his final gift, That safety deposit key, that letter, that foresight, had been the catalyst for something larger than just my individual case. I wish he was here. Emma's voice softened. I think he is. I think he's been with you this whole time, helping you be brave enough to fight. Maybe she was right. Maybe Richard's presence was in every documented transaction, every saved email, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. He'd taught me to be thorough, to trust my instincts, to never accept someone else's narrative about my own competence. Those lessons had saved me, and now they might save others. The book came out the following spring. Small launch, but decent reviews. Readers reached out with their own stories. Daughters who'd stolen, sons who'd manipulated, family members who'd used age as a weapon. The emails were heartbreaking and validating in equal measure. One woman wrote, "I'm 70 and my son filed for conservatorship last month. I didn't know I could fight back until I read your book. I'm getting a lawyer tomorrow. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Another, "I'm a social worker who specializes in elder abuse. I'm buying copies of your book for every client. You've given them something no pamphlet or statistics can, proof that fighting back works." The impact was small but real, and it gave meaning to everything Jessica had done, everything I'd endured, everything I'd fought to protect. 5 years after the court case, I stood in a university auditorium giving a talk about elder financial abuse. The room was packed with social workers, attorneys, and adult children struggling to help aging parents without infantilizing them. I told my story, not for sympathy, but as a case study. Here's what manipulation looks like. Here's how ageism enables abuse. Here's why documentation matters. Here's how to fight back. During the Q&A, a woman my age stood up. How do you reconcile protecting yourself with the guilt of taking legal action against your own child? The question hit the core wound I'd been carrying for years. The guilt that never quite disappeared. The maternal instinct that screamed I should have found another way. Should have protected my daughter even from herself. I don't reconcile it. I live with both truths. Jessica is my daughter, and I love her. Jessica is also someone who committed crimes against me and had to face consequences. Both things are real. The guilt is real too, but so is my right to autonomy, regardless of my age. Another hand. Did your daughter ever apologize? No, she's made every restitution payment on time for 5 years, but she's never acknowledged wrongdoing beyond what the court required. I've accepted that I may never get the apology I want. A younger woman, maybe 30. What would you say to someone whose parent is declining and really does need help? How do you know the difference between genuine concern and exploitation? The question I'd been waiting for. The nuance everyone missed when they heard my story and assumed all family intervention was bad. You know the difference by asking instead of assuming, by involving the person in decisions instead of making decisions for them, by respecting their agency even when you disagree with their choices. My daughter never asked if I needed help. She assumed I was incompetent because I was grieving and over 60. That assumption was the first red flag. The talk ran over by 30 minutes because people had questions, stories, fears. When it finally ended, a line formed to speak with me privately. Each person carried their own version of my story, different details, same core theme, family members who weaponized age, systems that enabled abuse, the crushing isolation of being dismissed as incompetent. I gave them resources, attorney referrals, the same advice Maggie had given me. Document everything, trust yourself, and remember that family obligation doesn't mean surrendering your autonomy. Driving home that night, I thought about the person I'd been 5 years ago. Newly widowed, manipulated, convinced I might actually be declining. That woman had been so close to giving up, to accepting Jessica's narrative, to letting herself be controlled. I was proud of her for fighting back, proud of her for saving those emails and bank statements, proud of her for calling Maggie instead of surrendering. She'd saved my life. Or are you fall? And in doing so, she'd given me the second act Diane had predicted. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just freedom, but the ability to help others find their own. The restitution payments stopped in year 7. Jessica missed 2 consecutive months, then 3. The probation officer filed a violation notice. Robert called to warn me. Jessica lost her job. She's claiming she can't make payments without income. Her attorney is asking for an extension. What happens if she doesn't pay? The plea agreement is void. Original charges get prosecuted. She's looking at prison time. I should have felt satisfaction. Justice, finally, for someone who'd stolen almost $200,000 and shown no remorse. But what I actually felt was tired. So tired of Jessica being a presence in my life. Tired of waiting for the next crisis. Tired of the story never ending. What do you think I should do? Robert was quiet for a long moment. I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night. If that means pushing for prosecution, do it. If it means accepting that you'll never get full restitution and just want to be done with it, that's valid too. Has she changed at all? No. She's still angry, still blaming everyone else. Emma tried to reach out last year, and Jessica spent the whole conversation explaining how you destroyed her life. Emma hasn't tried again. So nothing had changed. 7 years of payments hadn't brought insight. The threat of prison hadn't created remorse. Jessica was still the victim in her own story. And I was still the villain for refusing to be robbed quietly. I told the district attorney I wouldn't oppose prosecution. The trial was set for September. Jessica's trial lasted 3 days. She took the stand and performed the role of misunderstood daughter, of concerned family member, who'd tried to help and been punished for it. Her attorney brought in an expert who testified about how children of aging parents often struggle with role reversal and boundary issues. The prosecution brought Richard's letter, the forensic accounting, my testimony, Emma's testimony about witnessing Jessica's manipulation, Judge Moore's original ruling. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned guilty verdicts on fraud and identity theft. The judge sentenced Jessica to 18 months in minimum security prison, with credit for time served on probation. I sat in the courtroom and watched my daughter be led away in handcuffs, and what I felt was relief. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just relief that it was finally over, that the 10-year timeline had collapsed to 7, that I could stop waiting for the next violation, the next crisis, the next time Jessica would insert herself into my life. Emma sat beside me, now 23, and in her 2nd year of law school. She squeezed my hand as the courtroom emptied. Are you okay? I will be. Do you want to visit her? I considered this. Prison visitation, sitting across from Jessica in some institutional room, watching her maintain the narrative that she was the victim. Would it change anything? Would she finally apologize? Would there be a moment of clarity where she acknowledged what she'd done? No, I don't think I do. Emma nodded, understanding. Then let it be over. You did everything right. You protected yourself. You helped other people. You built a whole new life. Don't let her take up any more space in your head. My granddaughter was wiser than I'd been at her age. Maybe that was the real legacy. Not money or property, but the knowledge that you could survive family betrayal and build something meaningful from the wreckage. We left the courthouse together and drove to a coffee shop where I'd drafted parts of my book. Emma ordered something complicated with oat milk and caramel. I got plain coffee, black, the way Richard used to drink it. Tell me about school, I said. Tell me about everything that isn't this. And she did. She told me about constitutional law and civil procedure and the summer internship she'd landed at an elder advocacy nonprofit. She told me about her apartment and her friends and the person she was dating who made her laugh. She told me about her life, which was full and rich and entirely separate from Jessica's crimes. And I listened and felt something like peace. Jessica was released from prison after 14 months. I heard about it through Robert, who'd maintained minimal contact purely for Emma's sake. She moved to another state, got a job, started over. We had no contact, no letters, no calls, no attempts at reconciliation. She was alive somewhere, living with the consequences of her choices. And I was alive here, living with the freedom I'd fought for. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or healing or restored relationships. Some stories end with survival and boundaries and acceptance that some damage can't be repaired. This was one of those stories. But it was also a story about a 62-year-old widow who'd been told she was too old to manage her own life and had proven everyone wrong, about documentation defeating narrative, about age being something other than decline, about second acts and third acts and the understanding that competence doesn't expire at 60. I'd lost my daughter, but I'd found myself. And in helping others find themselves too, I'd built something that mattered more than any inheritance Jessica could have stolen. At 70, I was still writing, still speaking, still teaching people how to protect themselves. Emma was arguing cases, winning more than she lost, making a difference in ways that honored Richard's memory and my fight. We had Sunday dinners once a month when her schedule allowed. We video chatted weekly. And we never, ever talked about Jessica unless Emma brought her up, which she rarely did. My daughter was a lesson learned, a boundary maintained, a reminder that family doesn't excuse abuse and age doesn't equal incompetence. But more than that, she was a closed chapter, and I was busy writing new ones. The house I'd fought to keep was finally home again. The money I'd protected was funding Emma's work and my writing and donations to elder advocacy organizations. The competence I'd proven in court was being used to help others prove theirs. Jessica had tried to steal my autonomy using my age as a weapon. Instead, she'd given me a platform to fight ageism at its root, to prove that 62, 70, 80, any age deserved respect, deserved autonomy, deserved the right to make decisions, and yes, even mistakes, without being declared incompetent by younger people who thought they knew better. That was my legacy. Not the money Jessica had stolen and partially repaid. Not the court case or the criminal conviction. But the understanding that passed from me to Emma, to the thousands of people who read my books and heard my talks and learned to document, to trust themselves, to fight back. I'd turned my daughter's betrayal into a blueprint for survival, and that was worth more than any inheritance she could have taken. Some people spend their later years declining. I spent mine fighting, and in the fighting, I found exactly who I was supposed to be. At 70, I was just getting started,